much that despite my reputation, we had enough trust in our relationship that I could come here and present to you the first periodic table of strategic communication. 23 strategies of influence, developed with the help of some very fine companies, universities, and media companies. So what you might not know about me is that I am the son of a cell biologist. So my aspiration has been, is it possible that as communicators we could have a phylogenetic tree? Could we know the colors as they are? Could we know music as musicians do, rather than just simply play by ear? I would posit to you, this is the undergirding framework for communications and public relations. It is also the undergirding framework for marketing, sales, lobbying, corporate communications, public affairs, courtroom litigation, and information warfare. From Jim Grunig, two-way, symmetrical communication, to Vladimir Putin, one-way, my way, highway. And here's a little bit about how it's organized. As it's stacked vertically, the rated transparency of each of the 23 plays increases. So a decoy, for instance, is not necessarily as transparent as the play called disclose. As you go to the right, the level of engagement increases. In other words, the play called ping, which is to hint, is quite subtle and low engagement. The play called peacock is quite overt. It's essentially a stunt. To the left, there are probing and there are framing plays, which are all done for the purpose of conditioning. Then in the middle, there are plays that control, that divert or freeze. In some of the professional settings that I'm in, this system is met with a little bit like Dracula, like, that's really nice, and I'll take your phylogenetic tree of communication, but could you take off the poisonous species? And I don't like sharks. Take them off too. To the right are plays that confront, which press and provoke. So I'm betting that some people are already starting to formulate questions of ethics about these strategies and whether or not you use them, or they're used against you, or if they even ought to be on this table. I want you to see what the definition is that I apply to these things called influence strategies. Now, colloquially, I call them plays. But the real key is the criteria. What are the litmus tests that have to be passed for those 23 stratagems to meet and to make the table? There are 4, and they have to be all 4. It has to be unique. It has to be strategic. It has to address some form of a plan or a motive, something which says strategy. It has to be causal, and it has to be intangible. Let me give you a few quick examples of influence strategies at work. This one here is of Larry Ellison, September 4th, 1995. He at the time was my client. He's the CEO of Oracle, a large software company. And he said in front of Bill Gates, the PC is a ridiculous device, which at the time was not thought to be true. So Larry Ellison was doing something. And there's a long story to this, and it's told in my book about what we did. We got the client to say nothing so that we could create this referendum. Rather than do the usual PR pat-down, we actually created a fire around it because we knew he was right. But Larry Ellison was running a play called The Call-Out. Elon Musk also runs call-outs, but he's very fond of this play called The Test, sometimes called a trial balloon. And lately we know that he's been, warning of the vagaries and the dangers of artificial intelligence. So he's way to the left. He's low engagement, if you will, highly transparent, low engagement. Activists and anyone who cares about global warming is very keen to use influence strategies to make their case for why it does exist and why we have to act. And one of the most common plays that they use is called contrast. And contrast is to say A and B, X and Y, 1 and 2, to compare so that you can logically make your case. It's kind of like the nice guy's call out, if you will. And then there's Donald Trump, a top expert in these things that I'm describing. So he's very keen to run a play called Decoy. We know among his various things that he does is to get people to thinking and doing and running and looking elsewhere now. So he can confuse them, so he can run with his agenda, and so on and so forth. This is a critical strategy, and it is ethically packed, isn't it? But it's got to be on there. The advantages that I see to this system is that it's a lingua franca that I think we need. It is a decision system. Once you know the plays, then you can start to characterize them. Once you can characterize them, then you can start figuring out what to do. And then once you know that, is decrease your time to know. It is a really complicated thing that we do. So we've got to shorten the time to know, the time to certainty. And once we do that, then our time, what I'll say, the time to influence can then be sped up as well. Now that doesn't mean time to act. You don't always want to do something, but you certainly want to know, and you want to be able to act when the time is right. And then, of course, command and control. If you have this vocabulary, this lingua franca, then you can say, Jack, do this, Mary, do that, let's go here, and people know faster. Command and control is critical. And finally, a periodic table. Systems like a periodic table of chemistry, a phylogenetic tree in biology, have done so much to advance the fields because they finally know what they're talking about. I think we're such a young field that we're learning what we're talking about. And because there are some unflattering things up here, I think we may have been slow to come to terms with what we are really doing, or maybe what we're avoiding, or maybe what we should be measuring but aren't. When you go online and you click on any of the plays, up will come an information card, which will describe for you the profile or the traits, the conditions, the upsides, the downsides, the positive effects, the negative effects. And to me personally, the most important thing is the ways in which you counter a particular play. And here it's showing a play called Invoke, where you might bring in some symbol or idea to enrich your brand or your reputation or to increase trust. And here it's showing a blow-up of a counterplay, which would be a play called Recast. Once you know that, then you go here and here and here and here. Let me see if I can demonstrate that. This is from work that I did in the pharmaceutical industry. These are the aggregated and identified influence strategies by activists in a particular area that I won't mention right now. But they're activists protesting and grinding my client, the pharmaceutical company. These are the plays that they're running. You can see the hot spots. They're a little left and they're a little right. These are the plays that my client and their constituent scientists are running. They're more centered, they're more safe, they're more in the middle. So it's interesting. So this has never been done before. It's novel, I hope, to be able to know the strategies, name them, describe them, but then to start creating pictures. We're looking at kind of like an MRI, if you will, of a body or an organ. We're looking at, here's what they're doing, here's what we're doing, here's what they're doing, here's what we're doing. That starts to give you information of exactly how to handle the situation. Here's an example where maybe a blogger exposes a flaw in a client's product. And the client immediately runs a play called Deflect. They ignore it or dismiss it. Exactly what we don't want them to do. And they end up having to apologize anyway in a play called Concede. And what we might generally suggest they do is to disclose up front, before the blogger does, the flaw in the flagship product. That would be good. And if they did, it would obviate all that. We wouldn't have to go through that whole mess, and we wouldn't need crisis communications consultants. Of course we do, because they never do that. The third would be where they apologize immediately, and then the media goes away, the rivals stop their whisper programming, the regulators get off your back. But my point is, now that you see that, why stop there? You've got the stage. It might be a negative stage, but why stop there? Why not, as an example, form a council and invite your competitors? Because once you do that, it creates what a German friend of mine suggested is called a Zugzwang. It's a term of chess where there is no good alternative for the rival. That puts them into a situation where you are in charge of one negative situation and they are drug in to a situation where they are forced to either show that they're agreeing with you or they're oblivious and stupid for not agreeing with you. This is where my work is focused over the last 2 years is, I guess, what you might call strategy forensics. We have a portion of this system now active where it is actively reading content through machine language algorithms, and we're able to figure out on the fly, almost in real time, the plays that are being run. This is Ray Kelly, my precious grandfather. He's carrying a sensitive altimeter. He would go up to these barnstormer type pilots and he'll say, "Would you like to see it? It'll tell you exactly how high you're flying." And they would all pat him on the head and chuckle and they say, "Now sonny boy, I don't need that. I already know I'm up in the air." Accuracy and precision is essential, and we have far to go, I think, in this business of communications and public relations. Ultimately, the function of communications is to influence. Right now, the fashion is to do it with utter fairness, keeping in mind trust and the value of reputation. It has not always been that way. And I'm trying to articulate a system that goes across region, across customs, across cultures, across professions, across practices. I'm looking for a framework that is simply true. I want to introduce you to now a gentleman who is not nearly as mean as the picture shows. He's dabbled in theater and he's an expert in mimetics. So I'm curious to know what he would tell us about this and any other thought that comes to his very, very big brain. So welcome, Andrej Drapal.
Burmese with one-way model was right. Does that mean the two-way symmetrical Gruning theorem is wrong? No. Two-way symmetrical system is a complex of couple of Alan strategies. Those that are on the top of his periodic system, like disclose, test, label, concede, declare, and call out. So two-way symmetrical strategy exists and it's valid, but not with the purpose to win symmetry, but to gain advantage. Final aim of any strategy is to win, to conquer, meaning to break the symmetry. We should say, without any shame, that all kinds of PR theories that try to picture the vision of communication in a harmonious heaven where no subjugation happens are not only wrong, but misleading and harmful, both to environment and PR practice itself. What is fake? The simplest answer is that fake is anything that is not true. It doesn't matter whether fake is produced by intention or by ignorance. Truth happens as transition. It's quantum-like, meaning that more that you know its position, less you know its velocity. More you know accuracy, less you know about clarity.
Let me introduce Herbert Heitmann. In the world of chief communications officers, there are few that have his pedigree, and there are almost none that have doctorals in chemistry, which is what has made my relationship with Herbert interesting from the very beginning.
The PR profession itself finds itself in a severe reputational crisis. I've seen here in the leaflets distributed to European Communication Monitor, found that a striking percentage of 2/3 of the people inside an organization don't even trust the PR professionals. Professionalization comes with standards, starting from common terminology and ending with at least similar answers to the same questions. If in a corporation it's often so that the CEO is supposed to only ask the chief communication officer any kind of question related to reputation, and at least that person usually gives the same kind of answers. But I'm sure if he or she would go through just the own department and ask the same question 10 different professionals from the very same communication department in the very same organization, they would get quite an array of different answers. Which, on the engineering side, I could communicate with Japanese engineers without being able to speak a single word in Japanese, because every simple thing, the symbols, the way how we describe things was standardized. and that made it incredibly easy to define a problem and also jointly work on a solution. But in PR or communications or public affairs or reputation management, however you want to call this very same profession, there are not really these kind of standards, at least not universally applied that you can rely on. Neither do we use the same terms, nor do we share the same meaning. And that's this famous management table. That's where the CEO is surrounded by professionals, the highest ranking professionals in an organization. You have marketing, sales, finance, HR, development, and they all have a few things in common. They define what success means upfront. They measure their outcome, and they can tell you what it costs and how long it takes to deliver a certain kind of result. And then there is the chief communication officer, or the PR guy. The CEO must like him, otherwise he or she wouldn't sit there. The others tolerate him, often because they know the CEO likes him or her. But in many cases, the chief communication officer or the communication professional refuse to define success upfront. They say it's impossible to do this. I heavily disagree with this. They believe that major parts of the work cannot be measured. I absolutely disagree with this. Everything can be measured. It's a question of what you do with these kind of measurements. Communicators do not really have an idea how many and what kind of resources in play relate to a certain kind of outcome. They're all very busy. They all have best intentions. I'm absolutely convinced. But also often confuse output with outcome. We had in common with today's polished presentation here, it's a finite set of plays, as he calls them. They are very well defined. The names, the icons, the whole graphics, the functions are defined, as well as the possible interaction. So if you play a certain play, and then you flip the card on the backside, you see a handful of reasonable actions that could follow as a consequence of this play. And he proved that he can describe any form of communication with these now 23 really simple but well-defined plays. So all of a sudden we have something in our hand like a chess game, where the different players have a defined role, and like chess players know, they focus on the outcome, they plan, they are highly strategic, and it's rather easy to communicate and to manage this kind of game, because it's all defined and still the whole play is possible. If somebody describes a problem, now we would all be able to very quickly label it according to Alan's terminology and say, oh, there somebody played peacock. And then we flip the card and we see these are the 5 options, and very quickly I'm sure this group here, even with 50 people in the room, could agree which is the most promising of these 5 follow-up plays to achieve what we want to achieve. I think it would be a possibility really to introduce a much more stringent methodology and common language, and really an easy way across teams, across cultures, to have a more strategic discussion and to start defining the outcome before you start playing or engaging.